Hello again, and welcome to the lecture on disability and malpractice insurance. Although each lecture in this course is critical to your success, this lecture is arguably one of the most important. The material in the Fuseo Business of Medicine program is intentionally presented in a certain fashion, starting with the most global concepts about the medical industry. It then focuses down on the various aspects of a career in medicine, and then lastly we discuss individual issues that impact your individual work life. So let's use this paradigm to talk about insurance. Regardless of what you may have heard to date, insurance and insurance companies are a useful and vital part of a free society. With this lecture, we will introduce some of the global concepts regarding insurance and then talk more specifically so that you may effectively use insurance to your advantage. Thus, we hope that the knowledge you gain will help you make some important life decisions going forward. Thank you.
Before we discuss disability insurance specifically, let's take a step back and talk about risk in a more general way. We have to accept the fact that risk is all around us, and we would like to minimize the extremely unpleasant outcomes that risk can force upon us. Over time, many options to mitigate risk have been worked out by forward-thinking individuals trying to tackle this age-old adversary. Now let's take a closer look at ways to minimize risk. The techniques for minimizing risk for our purposes fall into several well-defined categories. Although specifics can vary depending on the situations, there are only a finite number of ways to reduce exposure or to mitigate the negative impact in a given situation. The following are the methods used to successfully mitigate risk. Avoidance. Simply avoiding risky activity altogether is the most effective risk minimization principle. This is surprisingly simple but often overlooked. An example avoidance could be a house with a swimming pool automatically carries with it much more risk than one without. Skydiving, scuba diving are much more dangerous sports than golf, for example. Segregation. Segregation describes the partitioning of activities, or in this case that we're going to use people, to reduce the risk of a catastrophic event. An example of segregation could be the simultaneous loss of both the U.S. president and the vice president will be so catastrophic that they always fly in separate airplanes. Next is diversification. Diversification means having more than one horse in a race to ensure success. An example of diversification could be the United Parcel Service. The technology used to track and route packages is so crucial that UPS has 2 data centers, one in Georgia and one in New Jersey, either of which is capable of running the entire company should one be rendered inoperable. Weather, power, and technology infrastructure, even seismic activity, were factored into the choice of locations. Diversification ensures that UPS is always up and running around the globe. Next is prevention. Prevention describes any attempt to reduce the probability of a loss occurring. An example of prevention could be installing a security system in your home, something as simple as that. Reduction means trying to minimize the severity of a potential loss if it does occur. An example of reduction could be using fire-resistant materials in building construction to minimize the damage a fire might cause should it occur. And lastly, there's the concept of transfer. That is, getting someone else to take the risk entirely. An example of transfer could be a hold harmless agreement in a contract that absolves one party of responsibility for an adverse outcome. It is critically important to remember and practice all facets of risk mitigation and not rely solely on transfer. While in an effort to mitigate risk, we have to look at all of the methods discussed. It will be the transfer of risk on which we will focus the majority of this lesson. As you might expect by the title of this lecture, the best mechanism to properly transfer the risk of losing your income from illness or injury is the invention and maturation of the insurance industry. Before we begin to discuss the transfer of risk, and more specifically how it relates to disability and malpractice, we need to look at insurance as a concept, the economic advantages and benefits of insurance. Nonetheless, insurance and insurance companies are a useful and vital part of a free society and bear closer examination here. Insurance companies have a specific way at looking at situations that involve risk. Before we discuss the specifics of disability and malpractice insurance, let's take a quick look at the benefits and advantages of insurance as it relates to our daily lives and on a broader scale, the economy as a whole. The following are some of the benefits of insurance and examples of each. First, let's talk about payment for losses. The primary role of insurance is to indemnify individuals, families, and businesses that incur losses. When an insurance company pays an insured for a loss, the company has indemnified the insured. To indemnify means after a loss to restore the insured to the same financial position as he or she enjoyed immediately before the loss. Next is the reduction of uncertainty. Because insurance provides financial compensation when covered losses occur, it greatly reduces the uncertainty created by many loss exposures. A family's major financial concerns, for instance, would probably center around the possibility of a breadwinner's death or the destruction of a home. When such an uncertainty is transferred to an insurer, the family practically eliminates these concerns. Insurance companies have a greater certainty than individuals about these losses, because the law of large numbers enables them to predict the number of losses that are likely to occur and the financial effects of those losses. Next is loss control activities. Insurance companies often recommend loss control practices that people and businesses can implement. Loss control means taking measures to prevent some losses from occurring or to reduce the financial consequences of losses that do occur. Individuals, families, and businesses can use measures such as burglar alarms, smoke alarms, and deadbolt locks to prevent or reduce losses. Loss control generally reduces the amount of money insurers must pay in claims. Next is the efficient use of resources. It is a common practice that individuals and business organizations set aside a certain amount from their income to face future uncertainties. By transferring such uncertainties to the insurers, they can use such reserves for further development by individuals and business organizations in exchange for a relatively small premium. Then we have support for credit. Before advancing a loan for purchase of any property, the lender wants assurance that the money will be repaid. Insurance makes loans to individuals and businesses possible by guaranteeing that the lender will be paid if the collateral for the loan, such as a house or a commercial building, is destroyed or damaged by an insured event, thereby reducing the lender's uncertainty. Then there is the satisfaction of legal requirements. Insurance is often used or required to satisfy a legal requirement. In many states, for example, automobile owners must prove they have auto liability insurance before they can register their vehicles. All states have laws that require employers to pay for the job-related injuries or illnesses of their employees, and employers generally purchase workers' compensation insurance to meet this financial obligation. Now, after the satisfaction of legal requirements comes the satisfaction of business requirements. Certain business relationships require proof of insurance. For example, building contractors are usually required to provide evidence of liability insurance before a construction contract is going to be granted. In fact, almost anyone who provides a service to the public, from an architect to a tree trimmer, might need to prove that he or she has liability insurance before being awarded a contract for services. Next is source of investment funds. One of the greatest benefits of insurance is that it provides funds for investments. When insurers collect premiums, they do not usually need funds immediately to pay losses and expenses. Insurance companies use some of these funds to provide loans and make other investments, which is helpful for economic growth and job creation. Moreover, additional income generated by the insurers helps to keep insurance premiums at a reasonable level. Then there's the reduction of social burdens. Uncompensated accident victims can be a serious burden to society. Insurance helps to reduce this burden by providing compensation to such injured persons. Examples of such insurances is auto insurance, workers' compensation insurance, etc. Without insurance, victims of job-related or auto accidents might become a burden to society and need some form of state welfare. And as we discussed earlier, there are a variety of ways to minimize risk. Now we're going to look at insurance as the transfer system to minimize that risk. Insurance is a system that enables a person, family, or business to transfer the cost of losses to an insurance company. The insurance company in turn pays for covered losses and in effect distributes the cost of losses among all of the insured. That is, all insureds share the cost of that loss. Thus, insurance is a system of both transferring and sharing the cost of losses. So let's talk about transferring the cost of losses. By transferring the cost of their losses to insurance companies, insureds exchange the possibility of a large loss for the certainty of a much smaller periodic payment, which ends up being the premium that the insured pays for insurance coverage. This transfer is accomplished through insurance policies. An insurance policy is a contract that states the rights and duties of both the insured and the insurer regarding the transfer of the cost of those losses. Now, a loss exposure, or simply an exposure, is any condition or situation that presents the possibility of loss. It is not necessary for a loss to occur for a loss exposure. Simply, there should be a possibility of a loss. Now, to examine this more closely, we have to examine the concept of loss. And the question that begs to be asked is, what is loss? When dealing with insurance, a loss must first be defined before it can be addressed. The second step then is to ask the question, is a loss insurable? There are many types of losses that occur each year, and not all are appropriate for insurance. It is important to note that a potential loss must be large enough to warrant insurance. Since the insurance company is looking to make a profit on the policy, there is a minimum threshold for the loss where the purchase makes financial sense to the policyholder. The following are the 4 characteristics that are all necessary for a loss to be deemed insurable. That is, for insurance to effectively address the loss. The first one is accidental. An unintended event that is not under the control of the insured and results in a loss. Any regularly reoccurring expense does not fit into this category. That's why car insurance does not cover something like tire replacement. Next, that loss has to be quantifiable, which means the probability of a loss occurring can be calculated and predicted. While the loss will never be predicted with certainty, an insurance company must be able to assign a probability to the event. A loss that can't be calculated can't be insured. Next, it has to be definite, which means there is an ability to calculate the amount of the financial loss. Arriving at a figure for lost wages or the value of a supertanker is easy. Pain and suffering is not, and is therefore not technically within the boundaries of an insurable event, much to the chagrin, of course, of most lawsuit defendants. And then finally, there's not excessively catastrophic, which means the insurable item or act must be able to be covered financially by the insurer. For example, acts of war are excluded in most homeowner policies. However, today insurance companies are very large, and even something as disastrous as the World Trade Center event did not jeopardize any one insurance company inordinately. If one carefully thinks about these 4 criteria for what is considered an insurable loss, you will find that we are often offered insurance in our everyday lives for losses that are not appropriate for insurance. For example, an insurable loss must be accidental. Therefore, insurance as an economic entity, granted disregarding social policy beliefs, is a poor mechanism for indemnifying individuals for routine health expenses such as blood pressure medicine and dental checkups. One loss that does fit each of these criteria well is that of the loss of income through disability. The probability of becoming disabled is calculated based on population studies, a stream of income is quantifiable, and disability is both accidental and not excessively catastrophic to society. So let's look at disability insurance a little more closely.
Obviously, the scenario given at the beginning of this lecture still holds true, but career-impacting injuries can be surprisingly easy to imagine. For example, a drunk driver runs a red light as you're driving home from a restaurant. The T-bone impact breaks both your legs, and as a surgeon, you're prevented from standing for extended periods of time. You now cannot perform surgery, and this negatively impacts your income and the entire trajectory of your professional career. As a result, the education that you spent so much time obtaining is your most valuable asset, but it cannot be directly insured. Indirectly, however, your income can be covered in case of injury. If you are unable to work due to an injury, you can draw income through disability insurance. For this reason, disability insurance is extremely important and highly recommended. Life insurance insures against death, and the probability of that is quite low in people under the age of 40. So life insurance can be quite inexpensive during your younger years. However, due to the higher probability of injury versus death for this age group, disability insurance is much more difficult to obtain. As such, disability insurers spend more time and energy evaluating an application. Extensive blood work, including an HIV test, an EKG, and drug testing is often required before approval. Even seemingly small issues, such as scuba diving as a hobby or even the temporary use of some antidepressant medications, can cause coverage to be difficult to obtain. Thus, the timing of disability insurance purchases for a young professional is very important. Although we will come back to this point at a later lecture, suffice it to say that one should consider purchasing disability insurance before they leave residency while they're still young, healthy, and likely to obtain the best pricing. Now here's how it works. Generally, if you've been deemed permanently disabled by a physician, disability insurance will pay 60% of your income up to the limits specified by the policy. 60% may seem low, but most professionals have an individual policy where their benefits are not taxable as income since the premiums are paid with after-tax dollars. This makes the 60% payout about the same as what you would receive after paying state and federal taxes on your regular income. However, if you are covered by a group policy at work, those benefits are taxable as income since the company received a tax deduction for the premium. Often, in this latter situation, the policy will pay a higher percentage of your income to make up for the tax differences.
All disability policies have similar features, although they can use slightly different terms to describe them. First and foremost, what is the definition of disabled? Loss of duties? Loss of income? This will be spelled out in detail in the policy and must be carefully reviewed with a trusted insurance person. Usually, disability is quantified by loss of income due to decreased ability to work. A disability policy should be written differently for each profession. For example, a physician versus surgeon versus laparoscopic surgeon should all have descriptions specific to their unique work responsibilities. Particularly for surgeons, how their occupation is described is very important. A policy that properly defines your exact profession may still pay for full disability even if you are capable of working at some lesser capacity as a physician, such as reviewing claims for an insurance company. Much like a deductible for health insurance, the elimination period is the period of time you must wait from the actual injury and when the benefits begin to pay out. The amount of the premium determines if the waiting period will be 30, 60, 90 days, or even longer. Once the payments begin, they can be paid for a fixed number of years or more commonly until age 65 or 67. Also, the policy will stipulate what happens if you are disabled for a period of time, then go back to work, but ultimately become disabled again. Some policies will pick up and some require another elimination period. So let's talk about partial disability riders. Riders are considered additions to a standard policy. and allow for partial payments as one returns to work gradually. This essentially adds additional income with the transition back to work. Next is COLA, or cost of living adjustments, and this helps prevent inflation from eating away at your benefits if you become disabled. Once disabled, the benefits rise with what's called CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. Next is FIO, which stands for Future Increase Options, and they often have various names, but all allow for purchase of additional insurance as your income increases without requiring a new physical exam. Now, when a policy is considered non-cancelable, it and its premiums are fixed and cannot be changed. The only exception to this is when the FIO is exercised. As long as the premiums are paid, the company cannot cancel the policy. And then finally, we have a guaranteed renewable, which means premiums can be increased by the company if it increases premiums for all policyholders in that class. But as long as you pay your premiums, the insurance company cannot cancel the policy, unlike health insurance. Currently, Social Security only pays if you are permanently and completely disabled, a much stricter standard than is imposed by the insurance companies. This is why a SIS, or Social Insurance Substitute, is available through disability insurance. It enables the policy to pay more than the benefit amount if Social Security is not paid. This is an amount of approximately $1,500 a month. So let's recap. Disability insurance is more difficult to obtain than other insurance, and therefore should be considered as you enter the later stages of your education and the prospect of a job grows closer. The sooner you obtain coverage, the healthier you are likely to be. For most physicians, this usually means obtaining disability insurance a year or two before completing residency and finding a policy with a future increase option, or an FIO. However, it is important to remember that disability insurance is not a lottery for cashing in if you are injured. Aside from any physical harm, no insurance policy can replace a lifetime of work and the income and other benefits it would create. The insurance is only there to be sure you have food, shelter, and perhaps the ability to continue to raise your family and care for yourself. Now remember the first part of this lecture. Transfer of risk is only one technique. As you begin to see value in your education and yourself, avoid risk by driving more carefully, hiring professionals to clean the leaves out of your gutters, and think carefully about risky hobbies like scuba diving, flying private aircraft, or any other activities that may compromise your ability to work. And speaking of work, the medical profession carries with it a unique risk called malpractice. Here's Dr. Gary Bernstein. Premiums are different for claims-made versus occurrence policies. A claims-made policy premium must reflect the total risk, i.e. the number of patients out there that you've treated in the past that could sue you at any time, regardless of how new you are to the insurance company. If you are a new physician and have no previous work experience, the premiums are lower for the first few years and ramp up by year 5. However, in an occurrence policy, the premiums are always the same for new as well as experienced physicians, assuming you have a clean malpractice record. Also, what happens if someone sues you after you've retired and or canceled your policy because you've moved or changed jobs? In an occurrence policy, as mentioned previously, you would be covered since the incident occurred while you were covered, just like with an automobile insurance policy. In a claims-made policy, you would not be covered unless you purchased what's called a tail. The tail is an additional one-time payment when you end your insurance with a claims-made insurer for any reason. The tail states that should any new lawsuits arise after you've canceled the policy, they will cover those future suits. Unfortunately, a tail premium can often cost 75 to 150% of the yearly premium, and that can be a significant amount of money for a specialist. Remember, however, when you entered practice, you received a discount, so the tail makes economic sense in that regard. Also, since tail coverage can be so expensive, it is frequently mentioned in employment contracts for physicians. Who is responsible is often a significant negotiating point in these contracts. Premiums for malpractice policies are based on multiple factors. Each state has its own range of malpractice award amounts and frequency of lawsuits filed. A physician's own experience with multiple lawsuits would drive up the premiums. Also, each medical and surgical specialty has different levels of premiums reflecting the number and size of lawsuits that have historically occurred in the state. Some specialties like neurosurgery and OB can have six-figure yearly premiums. The recommended level of coverage also varies from state to state. Often, hospitals will require a physician to carry a certain minimum level of coverage similar in scope to what you'd see in a car insurance policy. The most common coverage levels are between $1 million and $3 million. This means the insurance company will pay all costs to defend you, and should you lose, they will pay up to $1 million for any single occurrence and up to $3 million in total in 1 year. Generally, as your net worth increases, so should your coverage. Also, the level of coverage will be suggested by the size of the lawsuits that occur in your state. Most malpractice policies will also automatically cover the corporation if the doctor is in a group practice and each of the doctors is an insured within them. As far as the lawsuit itself, the insurance company either has lawyers on staff or simply pays an experienced local legal firm to defend you. As you know, any judgments against you in a malpractice suit follow you for the rest of your professional career and will need to be explained on each and every application for hospital privileges. Therefore, some insurance policies stipulate that the physician must approve any settlement agreed to by the parties. The insurance company cannot make an end run around the physician in regards to the actual settlement amount. However, this puts a big responsibility on the shoulders of the physician, since the decision to settle for a smaller amount or risk trial for a potentially larger amount can be daunting.
So in conclusion, don't forget the beginning of this lecture. Preventing lawsuits is much more cost-effective than buying more insurance. Studies have shown that taking time to explain everything to patients and families, returning phone calls promptly, and setting and fulfilling realistic expectations about their treatment all result in much happier patients who sue much less often. Thank you for listening.